What's going on, guys? Dr. Andrew Fix back here for another episode on the code. Haven't done one of these in a while where we're sitting in the office here at our DTC Denver Tech Center location at Physio Room inside of Lions Den Strength, Mobility, and Performance. But we're back at it, and we've got an awesome interview lined up for you guys today with Joel Freiboth, one of the coaches here at Lions Den. We've had the opportunity to work together now for about 3.5 years. In short, Joel is a personal trainer. He's one of the coaches here at Lions Den, and he specializes in doing a lot of individual personal training, but also leading group classes here inside the gym that are very what we call flow and mobility focused. He's kind of like the mobility guru around here when it comes to coaches. And a little bit about him: he's a NASM certified personal trainer. I really love that he has his 102 certification through the Ready State. So he's a movement and mobility specialist. And then if you're not familiar, maybe you will be a little bit more throughout this episode, but Joel's a level 1 Viking Ninja Steel Mace certified coach. So that's a piece of equipment or a group of equipment that Joel uses a lot of times with his clients: maces, clubs, things that are unevenly weighted. So Joel, excited to be having you here for this conversation, man. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks, Doc. I really appreciate you having me. Yeah, it's an honor. I really enjoy what you're doing with the podcast. Love what you're doing here, the Physio Room. You know that I send individuals, including family members. We really trust you and appreciate what you're doing. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like Joel kind of alluded to, we've had the opportunity to work with clients, both in the family, outside the family, and with each other, kind of side by side. Joel has given me tips and pointers when we're out in the gym to make sure that I'm performing better. And he's been a client of ours here at Physio Room. But why don't we do this, Joel, a little bit deeper than like the intro that I did for you. Tell us a little bit more about you. I know you're from here, but
Yeah.
You know, how did you get into coaching? How did you wind up here at Lions Den? And then where we're going to eventually take this conversation is talking about training and longevity, and how do we continue to train throughout the lifespan so that our body has the ability to do the things that we want to do no matter how old we are.
Yep. Okay. Love it. Love that topic. I have that conversation with a lot of the individuals I work with. Little bit of background about me, as you alluded to. I'm a Colorado native. That means proud part of the Broncos country. And you know, a lot of that has to do with me playing football for so many years as well. You know, kind of in my early years, when it came to activities, you know, I did gymnastics, karate, taekwondo, a little bit of dance. Then I got engaged into organized sports like baseball and football. In high school, I continued to play football, joined the wrestling team, did track to stay conditioned. But then in college, I actually pursued computer science and business. And even during that time, though, I still had the coaching blood in me. I actually got the opportunity to be the head coach of a youth football team for a couple of years. And I really cherish that deeply. You know, and then the majority of my 20s, I actually spent kind of following the entrepreneurial role. And then I got back into fitness like 24, 25, started doing some boxing. I participated in a 12-week boot camp program, which was straight from the Marine and Army protocols, super intense, but nothing like 2-a-days in high school football.
Yeah, I remember those.
And then after that, I actually got into hospitality and sales for a couple of years. And then I actually got into the fitness industry, starting over at Greenwood Athletic Club.
Yeah.
There, you know, I got to interact and befriend many people, especially the seasoned trainers. And that's where kind of the seeds were planted. One in particular, a trainer named David Nutting, he told me that I'd be a good trainer. And that was long before I ever thought about it. And I was like, oh, didn't even think about it. But Tristan, who I know that you've interviewed on this podcast before, owner of Lions Den, he and his wife, we were really good friends over there, and he used to do the same thing. And he used to tell me that I'd be a good trainer. And this was even when he was a trainer. And so when I decided to pursue that route, we also were good friends with another trainer named Sean Cook, who you've also interviewed.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
And so when I talked to them about it, you know, it started to get a little more serious, and then I jumped into it.
Yeah. So this was in your mid-20s?
This was actually by that point, I was actually in my early 30s.
Okay. Yeah.
And my first significant opportunity over at Greenwood Athletic Club was as the head strength and conditioning coach for the swim team, the Tiger Sharks.
Okay.
And yeah, that was a role that I really relished quite a bit, to say the least, particularly because I got to work with youth athletes, which is you know, a section of the population I really enjoy working with. And that's somebody that I work with a lot here. You know, we have a middle school program here that I head up and get them ready for our high school program. What other things so yeah, was there anything else that I kind of missed there?
Well, so you had worked with the swim team there.
Mhm.
So then at what point, you said that was like one of your first main kind of opportunities.
Yeah.
At what point did that sort of turn into you know, maybe where you took more of the turn to be more doing individual personal training? And then what I wanted to ask you, because we haven't talked too much about this, is totally off topic from longevity, but I think it's important because you spent some time in the hospitality industry.
Mhm.
So, and I know that there's a lot of parallels or things that can overlap in a good way between like working in customer service, hospitality, and working as a coach, because you're just building relationships with people and you're talking and communicating with people all the time.
Mhm.
So are there any things that you think you took from your years doing that you still utilize today as a coach?
I think I'm just kind of a natural social butterfly.
Yeah.
So that's why I probably did good in those industries. Some of the sales stuff maybe I've kind of taken in, but yeah, I think I've just always, interpersonal communication has always been an easy thing for me.
Yeah.
Relating with people. You know, I've lived a pretty crazy life, so just really, you know, I think I have relatable experiences with people.
Sure.
And so I think that's been helpful.
Yeah.
As a coach. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we notice with clients in our office. I'm sure you guys too, because like we have coaches here that have, bless you, that have you know, different specialties, right? Like one coach might be more geared towards mobility, one might be more geared towards Olympic lifting, one might be more geared towards working with women or working with runners, for example. And the clients, by their own doing and by the communication and marketing and sales of the facility, tend to gravitate towards those coaches, right? If you like look at one coach or one therapist's schedule, they have people on their schedule that lean into the sports and activities and the things that they like to do. And that's partially how we like find each other. So yeah, I think when you can relate to people, clients want to work with someone who understands what it is they're going through or what they're training for. Like you know, if they're a client in our office who wants to train for a marathon, doesn't really want to work with a therapist who knows nothing about running, right? They want to work with someone that understands running. So yeah, that makes great sense to me, because we kind of talk about that all the time in our office. So
yeah, I've you know, one of the questions you'd asked me prior to this was kind of like my evolution of training methods, and I think I've really gone through a lot of things, even starting at a young age, and that's one of the things that has given me kind of a broad understanding of movement and mobility. Though I think I've always had some intuition within it, even going way back into my early days in first organized sports. The coaches would always point to me and use me as the example. But I mean, I got into weightlifting when I was in middle school when I got into it. One of my best friends, he also was a football player, and we trained together at a place called Club USA for old Colorado natives. They probably know that place. And yeah, so I did that for a long time, and then my early 20s, basically through my 20s, the training kind of shifted into more bodybuilding style. And then when I got in my early 30s, I got into Brazilian jiu-jitsu and running, thanks to Tristan.
Seems like he has that effect on a few people.
Yep. And those two sports kind of gave me a different approach towards sports specific training.
Yeah.
And I started to educate myself a little bit more on that. And this is even before I was a trainer. And yeah, I mean, I started getting exposed to experts like Martin Rooney, Michael Boyle, like kind of functional or sports specific type training.
Yeah.
And you were talking about how people kind of gravitate towards me. Well, one of the things that I'd always dealt with, even when I was younger, was some chronic lumbar dysfunction. And it's hard to know exactly where that stemmed from, because I did get into this like a car accident when I was younger, and there's a chance that that's where some of the issues stem from. But I used to get injured from playing football every year. I would like tweak my back.
Got it.
And every year it'd get worse and worse and worse. And that actually ended up why I quit playing football my senior year, because it just was so bad that it would be like, when I first started out, it'd be like 1 week injury. By the time I was done, it'd take like 8 weeks for my body to recover. Well, when I was doing jiu-jitsu, I was actually injured myself again.
Yeah.
It was funny because I was actually teaching the kids self-defense class at the time, and we were doing some silly stuff, stretching afterwards, and I was doing stuff that I shouldn't have been doing probably, and I ruptured the disc somehow. And that really sent me down another path. It was a real pivotal moment for me personally, because I was back in I was out for that thing took 18 months for it to fully heal. But I got back in. I was good friends with a lot of physical therapists over at Greenwood Athletic Club. There was another company there.
Yeah.
And then I also, between them and a Pilates instructor named Rachel, I can't think of her last name. She was awesome. She was also a physical therapist, but she was a Pilates instructor. And she taught me how to, really brace properly.
Yeah.
And so I really dove deep into that. And that was, again, like I said, pretty pivotal with my own training. But I also have become very educated on lower back problems.
Sure.
And how to, deal with them, how to be able to train through them. Some of the doctors that I had seen said, "Oh, you're never going to be able to deadlift or squat heavy anymore." And I was like, I don't know about that. Like you're asking me not to do something that I think I should be able to do.
Yeah.
So I kind of challenged that a little bit by diving in deeper with and educating myself and also, through training. And it's really, steered me towards kind of like principles and more of a holistic approach to training. So yeah, I mean, that was where a lot of some of this stuff really, I started going, I have a lot to bring to the table here for people. And I was also, a private trainer over at Greenwood Athletic Club. So I think that's where I started getting this mobility tag, because I was also introduced through Tristan again, a physical therapist and renowned guy named Kelly Starrett. And he's like the mobility guru, and that really resonated. A lot of his principles really resonated with me. And so, yeah, we started teaching those things over there.
I got a question based on that came up, because I think people on the show people that we work with in the gym, obviously, so many people in the community are familiar with the experience of having low back pain. And I'm familiar with it. My people in my family are familiar with it. So many people have dealt with it or will deal with it. Is a really big problem in our society. A lot of people have it. And I think a lot of people are told what you said of you saw certain physicians and providers and they said, I don't want you to squat heavy. I don't want you to deadlift. Like I want you to avoid these things. And, when you speak with somebody like you or myself, well, we know at this point in our career that that's a bunch of BS, right? That the solution to a problem is not just to avoid things that bother it, right? Like we know that if you just avoid squatting and you hope to get back to squatting pain-free, well, avoiding squatting is probably not the way to do that. So I think now people are becoming a little bit more apt to seek out additional resources, seek out additional experts, additional specialists, and try to figure out like, well, I want to get back to this thing. And I don't want to just avoid running or avoid lifting or avoid whatever that some other more traditional medicine provider told them to do. And you had mentioned that you were working with a Pilates instructor, physical therapist who helped teach you how to brace properly to create stability around your spine when you're doing things. What other things do you think, in your experience going through this this lower back pain timeline, you said like 18 months, what other things do you think were like big principles that you learned that you really can point to helped you be able to get through that and be able to continue to do things without having your back continue to flare up over and over like it used to when you were playing sports?
Well, the key thing was learning how to brace properly.
Yeah.
That was like the most important part of that. And learning how to do that was, no one had ever taught me that. Even all the years that I trained in the weight room and the coaches would be like, oh, watch him do it. And they never taught us how to brace.
Yeah.
That was like the most important thing.
Now, I know it's easier, sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
I know it's easier to probably show somebody how to brace, but since we're talking about it, like when you and I say we want to brace properly, can we try to explain like what the hell that even means?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so, and the people that are listening to this, again, we appreciate you for tuning in, but maybe try to like go along and play along with this so that as Joel describes how to brace and how to create some stability throughout your lower trunk and your midsection, see if you can do it. I think that would be a good exercise to go through.
Yeah, well, if I was walking somebody through that, I'd actually probably have them start laying on the ground.
Yeah, sure.
And then just activating their glutes, so squeezing your butt. A lot of the times when we're educated about bracing, we think it's just trunk muscles, like or even less than that, just ab muscles.
Just abs, yeah, sure.
But I like to teach people that it's glutes and maybe even high trunk, like the entire glutes all the way up. So, squeezing the glutes is first aspect, taking a deep breath in diaphragmatically, exhaling out, and then getting the rest of the trunk musculature active. One of the concepts that I'll tell somebody or for them to conceptualize is I'll pretend like I have a real heavy medicine ball and I'll be like, okay, on your breath out, I'm going to drop this 20-pound ball on your stomach. And what are you going to do? You're going to brace really hard. You're just naturally. And so that's something that I try to cue people on doing glutes and then trunk, glutes, trunk. And then eventually it's both of those things. And that's the full brace.
Yeah. It sounds like you're saying, after you engage the glutes, as you inhale and on your exhale, you're trying to like pull everything in and create this stability, kind of like the muscles around your spine, creating like a corset that kind of like create this inward tension, as opposed to try to think of the example of like a blowfish or something, right?
Sure.
Who like inhales and provides all this pressure outward to create this big balloon effect. That's not necessarily what we're talking about. And, sometimes I have this conversation with people where they're wearing like a weightlifting belt and their strategy is to push outward into the belt. But what we know is a better strategy is to create that tension inward around your spine. And then if you are lifting heavy and you have that belt on, that's there as a safety mechanism for that, to provide that extra layer of stability, be an extra layer of, we'll call it trunk musculature. Not that you want to cue yourself to push outward, so that we're using the deeper stabilizing muscles to do the work.
So one of the good cues that I picked up from Pilates all those years ago was pull the belly button to the spine. I think that's a great one. But there's also an added layer to that I learned listening to Chris.
Yeah.
Dr. Roble, about pulling the belly button to the heart too.
Pulling it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not just in, but up a little bit.
Yeah. I think that really helps to activate some of those deeper trunk muscles.
Yeah.
You can also visualize like the muscles around your spine trying to get tighter around it. So that's another thing to think about when you're bracing.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that, because this concept, right, of bracing to create stability, it really carries through everything that we do, right?
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter like what you're doing. If you are playing a sport, say football, and you're going to take some contact, make a tackle, be tackled. If you're lifting in the gym, you're deadlifting, you're squatting, you're pressing, right? It doesn't matter if you are shoveling snow, right? You know, we've had one big snowfall. We're going to have more this winter. We need to brace and create stability when we do it. And sometimes clients ask me like, well, do I need to brace all the time? And to that, I say the answer is no. Like, you don't need to be bracing 24/7, but it doesn't really matter like what the activity is or the lift or whatever. But like, yeah, when you go squat, I expect you to brace. When you pick something up off the floor, even if it does not weigh very much, I expect you to create a little bit of a brace when you do that. So that we're just continuing to reinforce those patterns and those habits, that are going to keep us all moving well.
Now, to kind of piggyback off that, I think when people ask me that question, should I be bracing all the time? I think the answer is yes, but there's like a certain scale.
It's like a spectrum. Yeah. It's a continuum.
So like 0 being sleeping, we're not even thinking about it. 10 being we're about to lift something heavy off the ground or take a hit on the football field. That's like what I call super brace, worst braces we could possibly get.
Yep.
Even when we're sitting around, you know, I think that we should be slightly braced. We're trying to activate the glutes and just trying to activate the trunk.
Or like a 1 or something, a low number on that scale. As Joel and I both sit up, create a little bit of tension. So if you did that at home, you're not alone.
So to add the second part of that question, bracing was really important. But the other thing that I think was really important about kind of getting back into healthy movement was moving properly.
Yeah.
And again, I was always like, I've always moved really well, but like really getting into the depths of that. And that's where like Kelly Starrett really blew my mind and took it to another level where, you know, you're diving into the principles that help govern movement mechanics, and really learning how to get your body organized and ready before you start moving. So yeah, getting really efficient in movement was this kind of the second part of that. And yeah, I mean, that was I kind of had to start all over again.
Relearning things.
But you know, I haven't ever been able to squat as heavy as I did in my high school days, but I could deadlift more.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. And that's, I think, honestly, one of my weakest lifts. So you know, and I understand where the doctors were coming from. Their intentions were you know, from a good place where they don't want me to injure myself, but at the same exact time, like I knew that we can't not squat or not lift things off the ground our entire lives. So there's got to be a medium there. So
totally.
Yeah. So anyways.
Yeah. No, I think that's good for this conversation, because many people that get into the professions that we're in have their own stories, right? Their own experiences with injuries and things that they've dealt with. Or I was speaking with a young high schooler recently who he wants to be a personal trainer. And the reason why is because he has had a great experience working with one himself. So like he's worked with someone and now he respects and looks up to that person. He wants to do what they do. So that's common in our professions of either you've worked with a really good person yourself because you've had your own experience with training or injury, and that's how you kind of get exposed to it. And I'm right there with you on the like having had my own issues from an injury perspective, and now I do what I do. But man, I've had to challenge what I thought I knew and challenge the movement beliefs that I had of relearning a lot of things. And I agree. I think we can give a shout out to it. I think the Ready State, what used to be Mobility WOD, and the movement education program that they have, and the books that they've written, Built to Move and Becoming a Supple Leopard, et cetera, et cetera. I think those things are phenomenal. And I think for what they are as a manual for people, I think they taught me so many things that I did not learn in all of the years of education that I had, right? Like I feel like you go to school to from a physical therapy standpoint to learn how to diagnose things, to learn how to rule out medical red flag issues, because now we have like direct access, and I need to know if I need to refer someone for imaging or if I need to refer someone to a different provider, like if they're not in the right place and they're having an issue that a cardiologist or an orthopedic or somebody needs to see them for. And I feel like that was so much of what the education was, like making you be able to know who you should be working with and who you should not be working with. And then just starting to get your feet wet of like, well, what do you actually do with people? But physical therapy school does not teach you how to treat everybody, like how to handle all of the issues that somebody's going to walk in with, because school would be so long. Like you'd have to be in school for a dozen years to be able to do that. Like we learn so much and evolve so much when we're out of school and we're actually in the field working. So that was where I found that the Ready State, Mobility WOD and stuff was after school. And I treat clients very differently now than I did several years ago when I first got out of school, because I didn't incorporate all of those principles. So it's interesting. Huge shout out to them and their resources. And we'll continue to work on getting them on this podcast. We've had some conversations about that.
Cool.
So hopefully we have some conversations with them coming up in the future, the Starretts. So,
I think that's why they call what you guys are doing a practice.
oh, it's a practice.
And I would even say that, personal training is a practice as well.
100%.
And I love, I appreciate what you've done with all your education. And that's the reason why we lean on you guys so much, because even though with all this education that we've had and experiences, there's only so much that we can learn. And that's why it's nice, if there's something that I'm like, oh man, I just can't figure this out. We got to get them over to see doc and see what's happening.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because it's definitely not easy. Physical therapy school is getting hard to get into these days. I talked to a lot of students who are just applying to all these places, and but I think we're so used to in a facility like this where we have a lot of minds, right, and a lot of levels of experience. Like people have been doing this for a long time, right? Sure. Coaches have been doing this for a long time. Provide therapists who have been doing this for a long time, and we're so used to, I think, being able to, if we're working with a client that's dealing with a problem, we're so used to being able to help them, right? When we were just having a conversation before we hit record of, some of the folks that we're working with who are dealing with like really frustrating, challenging things that, we're all racking our brain, trying to help them. And we're slowly making some progress, but like everybody's scenario is not just like easy, right? And like you said, it's a practice where if it was easy to just get people like, from dealing with back pain back to feeling 100% normal, well, it wouldn't be the type of problem it is in this country or in the world of people dealing with pain, right? It's not easy to work through that. There's a lot of factors, but I think we're just so used to being able to help people relatively quickly get from one point to another, that when we see someone not progressing quite as fast, we get frustrated. Not at them, just at the scenario of like, man, well, we want to see you back to doing the things you want to do.
This is one of the reasons why I love working with the youngsters, because we can kind of get I can brainwash them at a young age, and hopefully, and I'm obviously messing around, but trying to teach them these concepts, these principles at a young age to get them ingrained
Yeah.
into their motor behavior and function, before they, develop any kind of issues is really important. Something that I'm pretty passionate about, and so that's why I like working with the youngsters.
Yeah.
But because I've dealt with a lot of these issues with myself, it also has allowed me the opportunity to work with individuals, in their middle ages that are dealing with a lot of these things. So
Yeah.
I've become pretty experienced with it, and we've had some really good successes.
Oh man, I think so. And I think there's a couple people in particular that like I see you work with consistently that like I'm picturing in my head right now as we're having this conversation. But let's go into that a little bit of, like training longevity, right?
Okay.
Training as we age. And like you said, learning how to brace, learning how to move correctly, movement efficiency was big for you. And then you just mentioned when you get the opportunity to work with someone at a young age, these are the types of principles you teach them, right? Like how to move correctly at a young age so that they can carry that through. But we meet so many people from a physical therapy or a personal training standpoint who may already be in what we'll call the middle years of their life, right? Like maybe they didn't have this education when they were younger. Maybe they were taught different movement principles. For example, not to let your knee go past your toes when you're squatting, or put all your weight back on your heels so that your toes can kind of lift when you're squatting, things that we don't generally teach them here. So when you're working with someone who's like already later in their life, in, not to offend anybody on the show, let's call later just for the purposes of this, like past the years when most people are, you're done with college, you're done with having children, your children are growing up or they're already grown. So you're probably, I don't know, we'll call it like 45 or later, right? Because most people at that point, a lot of their really athletic endeavors have already passed. And a lot of people continue to decline in activity level as we age. We know that that's a fact from all the statistics out there, that activity level continues to decrease as we age and we get towards like the final decade or 2 decades of our life. And we're actually starting to see, this term health span come up instead of lifespan, right? And I know you and I fall into this camp of like, we would rather live whatever age, being able to do the things we really want to do, having a great health span, as opposed to just live longer and be alive longer, but not being able to actually do anything and just be, hanging out in a nursing facility or assisted living facility, not being able to thrive. So I think the people listening to this are the same. So what I'm getting at is how do we continue to train as we age when we might be dealing with pains or limitations in range of motion, and like we can't move how we used to be able to move because we haven't done that. Like, how do we get to a point where we're able to use our bodies to do the activities that we want to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we use it or lose it.
Yeah.
And everybody has heard that cliche. So it's like, if we want to do something, then we got to get back to doing it. And obviously, maybe coming into that, everybody starts off a little bit differently. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways that if someone came in and was deconditioned or maybe slightly out of training, then I would start real basic. But some of the things that I'm doing with the individuals I'm working with now is we're really getting into stability. And stability can mean anything from balance on one leg to literally lifting heavy weights. because either way, we're really focusing on, stability. I think that's really vital.
Yep.
I also think that adapting training routines is kind of important too. I feel like a lot of people have activities or sports that they're still involved in.
Totally.
And so kind of looking at that seasonally, that helps kind of dictate things. And exercise selection is big for me. I really lean into utilizing modalities like kettlebells, and maces, because I think they're very multifaceted. I think there's so much bang for the buck, kind of so say.
Yeah.
And the risk reward there, the risk is lower, and the reward is still the same. We're still training good motor behavior, and if we can challenge that, but we're also working strength. There's, for instance, with a kettlebell swing, I mean, that's a really multifaceted exercise. I mean, the benefits are we're combining strength. There's a cardiovascular component to it. There's power type training.
Absolutely.
So like, I really like doing exercises like that with people, because we're getting a lot out of an exercise like that. Now somebody that has never swung a kettlebell before, I'm not gonna just throw them right at that.
Yeah.
But we're gonna work up to exercises like that as quickly as possible. And I have some of my people, even if they're in their 60s and 70s, we're still gonna do plyometric stuff.
Yeah.
We're gonna try to do it as safely as possible, because I don't, last thing I need or they need is to take a fall and break something.
Sure.
But I also think it's really important that they're practicing things like that, because in the real world, you might step off of a curb and be unbalanced. And if your body hasn't trained like that, in a more controlled environment, what do you expect it to do in the real world? Like, that's how people end up getting injured. So, these are the ways that I look at kind of training as we get older, trying to simplify some of the things that we'll be exposed to in the real world, and then trying to practice those skills in a controlled environment. And everybody comes in differently, but yeah, I'm trying to challenge people even at an older age. I mean, I want to be challenging them. Also, VO2 max training is really important. Grip training. I mean, these are two these are two factors that we know, supported by numerous studies of how important it is to support longevity. And again, I really do think that efficient movement is a key factor to preserve body function over time. And what I found is people that, even if they come in here, and they're decades of sitting or decades of restriction in their ankles, guess what? When we actually focus on improving those things, guess what happens? They improve, because the body is really resilient, even in all the way until we die. So yeah, I mean, I'm doing these things. If people want to improve ranges of motions, well, guess what? We're going to work on getting into end range positions and trying to, reestablish the new norm for their bodies.
I think I like, or the thing that I like the most about what you just said is, or how you did not answer that question about if people want to improve ranges of motion, we're not just stretching to try to improve range of motion, right? Like we are going to work at that, and we know that there's a lot that goes into that, and we're going to try to establish a new norm of how their body moves in that position or in those joints, because we can lack range of motion for a lot of different reasons. We could lack tissue length, in which case potentially stretching would be a good option for that, to lengthen out that tissue. Then of course, if you do that, now you need to make it stronger, because if you make a tissue that is elastic, longer. Well, now we need to layer in the strength so that it can continue to control the joint that it's supposed to move through that range of motion. But joints don't move for a lot of other reasons. It might not be tissue length. It might be the joint is stiff. It might be a strength issue or a stability issue that you can't get there. It might be because of the environment that we're in, and the ankles are a good example of that. Like, if you always spend time in shoes that have what's called a 12 millimeter drop, where the heel is 12 millimeters thicker and cushioning than the front of the shoe, it's pretty hard to get into an end range dorsiflexion or like full bottom of a squat kind of position, because your shoe is at the very least holding you 12 millimeters higher in the heel. You're not really accessing that full range. So sometimes we need to get out of the environment that's not letting us access a range of motion. And then to just sort of close the loop on the part that you said about, we want to simulate activities that people may encounter in the real world, I think is so important. And I want to make sure that doesn't get lost in this, because sprinting is a good example. Stepping off a curb, losing your balance and being able to catch yourself, that you said is a great example. Having to jump even a small amount is a great example, because people may have to do these things, right? Like, you're a father, I'm going to be soon. If it's my kid or anyone else's kid who, like, I see a kid like in the middle of a street and a car is coming, if you can't quickly get over to that child to get them out of the way, because you have not even tried to sprint or move quickly in 30 years since you like stopped playing sports or something, it's not going to be very easy to do that. And the likelihood that somebody hurts themselves trying to do that is significantly higher, let alone you're less likely to be able to actually like save the kid from this coming car who, the person might be texting and not see them or something. But you had mentioned, we don't want people to say fall and break something. And I think that's a big point, because I think that's one of the biggest factors that leads to people falling and injuring something, is that they're not preparing their body to prevent that scenario. And fractured hips is a huge issue. Many people, as they age, particularly as they get past 65, will fall and will fracture their hip in the process. And the statistics, if that happens to you or someone that you love, are really scary. Because basically, without getting like super specific, basically what the statistics in the research studies show is that if somebody falls and breaks their hip, 1/3 of those people are going to recover well from that scenario, and they're going to get through it. They're going to heal, whether they have surgery or not. They're going to recover. What the statistics also show is another 1/3 of those people are going to live the rest of their lives in a assisted type of scenario, whether that means like assisted living or nursing home, having somebody sort of watching or supervising them, or at the very least down one level when it comes to assistive devices. Meaning, if you were used to walking with a cane, now you fell and broke your hip, there's a 33% chance that you're going to spend the rest of your life walking with a walker, not just with a cane. Or if you were walking with nothing, no assistive device, there's a 33% chance you may spend the rest of your life walking with a cane. And then the really scary part is that the stats show that 1/3 of those people who are over the age of 65 who fall and break their hip will not live longer than 12 months after that happens. And that is the part that scares the heck out of me. And you mentioned power and being able to move quickly and catch ourselves. That's like one of the biggest factors in stopping yourself from falling or injuring yourself, is being able to react quickly and powerfully if something starts to happen. Because we're not going to be able to prevent ourselves from tripping or slipping or this and that. Like, falls and losses of balance are going to happen. And there's things that you can do to make that less likely, of course, but they're still going to happen. And being able to react and respond to that scenario is going to be so much easier to somebody who's training and trying to simulate those activities and demands. But anyways, I just wanted to make sure to talk about that, because the stats are crazy, but they're true. And we want to try not to put ourselves in that scenario.
And so that's something that, I do, even in my training. And I think it's just important, one of the things too is getting up and down off the ground.
Yes.
Spending time on the ground. I have a lot of people do, animal primal type movement patterns, and boy, it's tough on some people. And so yeah, there's a lot of things that we can do to kind of stave off that. And we hit hard here about muscle mass and how important that is, and so yeah, we just try to stay consistent with it.
So we want to try to gain back the limitations in motion that we have, right? If we're lacking range of motion, we want to try to enhance that and improve that. When we're moving, we want to brace efficiently and effectively to protect our body and our joints from the load and the resistance training that we're doing. Whenever possible, we want to try to move through full ranges of motion, right? So that we're maintaining those and creating stability throughout the range of motion, like, not just at the top of a squat, but also throughout the entire middle, all the way down to the bottom of a squat, not losing stability at the bottom, so that we're not putting undue stress on the joints. And we want to train. One of the things I like that you said is we want to train with a variety of modalities, right? Like, we don't want to just train like one way only, because then we're not really reaping the benefits of like all the different ways that our body can and was meant to move. So if we can vary our training and undulate it a bit and have it go through seasonality, where like, yeah, maybe there is a period of time where people are training with barbells and dumbbells, but then are there periods of time where we're doing things more single leg, we're using different implements, things like maces and kettlebells, to make sure that we're able to handle all the different demands that life throws at us. I think is so important.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the reasons why I love the mace so much is because it kind of trains that transverse plane. There's this rotational component and anti-rotational component to it that I feel like a lot of traditional exercises don't touch, and that's why I love those maces. And even single arm kettlebell work to kind of puts the body in this under similar loads. And then there's like you had talked about how moving through end range position is really important, and I want to add on to that, because if our body forgets what an end range position feels like, we just stop having access to it. Now all of a sudden we can't express ourselves the way that we're designed to move. And some of two of the biggest ones that I really like to expose the individuals I'm working with is the overhead position, particularly pull-ups. So I mean, I don't care what age we are, we're doing pull-ups, because again, that's a multifaceted exercise that we're exposing that shoulder to overhead position that we don't do very much throughout the day.
I think I know the other one you're going to say.
And hip extension.
There it is.
The lunge movements, single leg movements. That's another thing, especially if we live in such a desk bound society, or we spend a lot of time sitting down, that our hips don't they forget they're in such a flex position all the time, they forget how to extend. Those are two that I really hammer with almost everybody that I work with.
Tristan and I were actually even working with a group of high schoolers last week, and he and I had talked prior to taking them through a workout, and developing a training routine is like, that's obviously your guys' bread and butter. So Tristan created what his plan was for the workout. But as we talked through why we were going to do the things with those kids that we were doing, those were two of the principles that we wanted to make sure were incorporated into the hour-long session: overhead arm position and hip extension. Because honestly, pretty much at the age of I guess I'll say high school, or it could even be earlier, unfortunately, we sort of stop expressing ourselves in those movements, getting our arms straight overhead, getting our thigh, our femur behind us, which is what we mean when we talk about hip extension, getting your thigh behind you compared to neutral or flexed if you're sitting in a chair or doing a squat, unless you're specifically doing a sport or an activity that requires you to do that. If you are training and you're doing things that put you in those positions, or you're playing a sport that puts you in those positions, But daily life of like normal people who are just going to work every day in most jobs do not require you to do either one of those things. Lifting something over your head, doing a pull-up, putting your thigh behind you more so than what you get just from walking, which is not very much. And then we see issues like whenever someone has to do one of those things, a lot of times they really struggle with it. Like I was traveling this weekend, I watched many people put up and take down their bag from the overhead compartment in the airplane. And I wanted to help so many people, but like one, you can't help everybody, and two, not everybody wants assistance, like they want to do it. But you can tell that like aside from putting their bag in the overhead bin, like how often do they lift something of weight over their head? Probably not very much. And that's probably why it's very difficult to do that a lot of times, especially as we get older.
The other thing to add to that too is, when our hips and shoulders start to lose one end range position, it actually impacts our other end range
Yeah,
positions.
great point.
And so that's why it's another important, why it's important to train those end range positions. Another thing that I hammer hard with people is the importance of activating their posterior chain. And that's another reason why I like pull-ups.
Yeah.
Because we live where everything's in the anterior world, which is essentially out in front of us. And so a lot of times we forget that we have these big muscles behind us, which really the biggest muscles in our body are our posterior chain muscle groups. And so any exercise that I can access those or train those, I do.
Yeah.
And choose those over a lot of pressing movements.
Yeah, I like that.
Out in front. So yeah, so that's kind of the things that I think are really important with longevity and how that fits in training. And some other things that I think are pretty important that are pillars to mention are still adequate sleep, hydration, nutrition. I mean, these are we all know about those, but these are conversations that we're having with people with our patients and people working. So
yeah. Well, why don't we do this? I'll get you out of here on this. I have one more question for you. You and I very briefly talked about this in the gym yesterday, because this came up in a conversation I was having outside of here. Is at what point, if at what point should somebody kind of start to rekindle or reshape the expectations that they have about what their body can and cannot do? Like, for example, the example that got brought up is somebody who like grew up, was an athlete, and at like what point should they maybe not expect their body to be like quite the intense athlete that they were when they were younger? We just talked about trying to train through the lifespan, but this question that came up, and someone's continuing to try to push their body pretty intensely, kind of in like a weekend warrior kind of format, right? Okay. And what was happening is they're continuing to aggravate things and have small nagging injuries that they're dealing with. Yeah. And another provider they were talking with, was sort of telling them, well, maybe it's time to give up the days of doing this sport or activity, right? That involved running and agility and this and that. So I don't know. I'm just posing that question to you. Is there a point in time where people should, like maybe the physician told you, start to consider avoiding certain activities or stopping doing something that they want to do because they keep tweaking things along the way?
I would say no.
I
would say life's too short. We got to have some fun. If that's what you enjoy doing, we got to do it. The thing there is if you're weekend worrying things, then you're not putting in the work that's required. Yeah. We can get away with that when we're young. Yeah. But there was a cost even when we were young. We were chewing through, what we call duty cycles. Our body only has so many cycles. Every system in the body only has so many duty cycles before it's just going to fail. Yeah. So when we push our body without doing all the proper things, which include recovery, resistance training, proper hydration, sleep, nutrition, then we're chewing through something faster. And so it sounds like that person in specific is probably getting closer to chewing through their buffer zones, and their body's telling them, hey, this can't continue. So they need to listen to their body and adjust.
Yeah.
Everybody's probably, that's a different for everybody. I think we can do whatever we want to for as long as we want to.
Yeah.
We should be able to. I mean, to me, that's one of those definitions of fitness, being able to express our body when we want to, however we want to, spontaneously, instantaneously. You know, these are and we should be able to do it without getting injured too.
Yeah.
Really important.
Yeah, I like that. And that's kind of where my head was when I was hearing this scenario. Because like I said, I was being asked by another provider about a client they were working with. And she, you know, it sort of asked me, do you think I should tell them they need to stop doing this? And I was like, well, tell me more. Tell me more what's going on. And I think the biggest thing is one verbiage shift that I have had or gone through in the past several years is no longer do I call what we do in our fitness life working out, right? It's not working out. You're not just like showing up at the gym to do meaningless exercises for no purpose in mind. We call it training, right? Because training has a different purpose and method and thought process behind it than doing a workout does. And so like, we don't call it working out here. We call it training, or it's a program that someone's going through or something, or in our world, it's a plan of care. It's not like you're just coming in for physical therapy for an hour, because that looks very different for everybody. It's a plan that a tailored plan that we're trying to follow. And so that's the way that I look at it now, is like every time I do a workout, a training session, there's a goal in mind, right? We're trying to express and perform certain movements, certain skills, certain positions, so that when the performance comes up, whatever that might be, the performance might be a race, it might be a powerlifting competition, it might be a football game or soccer or something else, it might be playing with your grandkids. When the performance comes up, you're able to put on a show, right? Like you're able to do the thing and perform to the level that the training that you went through dictates that you should be able to do. So I don't know, that's kind of the way that I look at it, of what are we training for and how can we tailor our training plan to help us try to achieve that outcome. And we talked about a lot of factors that go into that.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, obviously, the older we get, at some point we're not going to be performing like we were in our peak years. But but I think we can actually push that out quite a bit. And in fact, you know, we've seen, you know, people being able to compete at high levels even in their 50s, you know. And so it's like, I mean, it's just like you said, you got to put in a little bit of work. You got to do all the things that you need to be doing. And it doesn't have to be complicated. That's the other thing. Like, I try to simplify things for people too. It's more about consistency and just making sure we're doing what we should be doing on a daily. Kind of like we floss our teeth every day, or we should be. There's certain things that we should be just doing every day to help keep the body performing well.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Well, why don't we do this, you guys, as we wrap this conversation up. Again, Joel, I want to thank you for being here. I mean, we see each other, but for blocking out this time so we can have this conversation. And for any of you guys that tune in to listen to this, if you are looking to connect with a coach or a trainer who understands what it's like to work with kids, to understand what it's like to work with people that are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and still wanting to push their bodies to be able to do the things that they want to do. I mean, literally, I saw Joel having one of the older clients that we have here in the gym doing box jumps last week. Like, safely. Yeah, exactly. He did not get hurt in the process, and he wants to do it, right? Like, it's a goal of his to be able to do something he used to do. But I can't recommend him highly enough. I think he does a great job. I hear him communicating and talking with people all the time. So if people want to get in touch with you, Joel, how can they do that? What's the best way to get in touch? Or we're going to include some of this stuff in the show notes, but
I would say probably my email. Or that's probably the easiest. You have my Joel at lionsdensmp.com. That's
Yeah.
probably the best. Yeah, and then, I can link anything to the bio or whatever we have.
That sounds great. We'll put that stuff in the show notes for you guys. And like I said, if you're looking for a coach who gets it, who isn't going to say just avoid this and you don't have to throw a football anymore, or like whatever your goals are, I think Joel would be a great resource for you. And I just appreciate you carving out the time to hop on this show, man.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys. We hope to catch you next time on another episode of The Code. And if you've not already done so, we have a goal of trying to get to 200 5-star reviews on this show. If you've listened to this before, you've probably heard me say that. But if you enjoyed this conversation, man, I would really appreciate it if you go drop a review on there so we can get this show out to more and more people just like you to make sure that they can see the benefits as well. Again, Dr. Andrew Fix with Physio Room. We'll catch you guys next time on The Code.
Sweet. Thanks, Doc.